Okay, so we are reading Aghora, the left hand of God. We are in the introduction, page number 27 of the book, and page
This is
16.
also 27. This is also 27
Okay,
actually.
yeah,
It
page
is a
16 or
PDF.
27 of the PDF.
He was not so easy to fathom, and he deliberately made his lessons hard to understand. When he decided I should learn something, he would deftly insert it into a flood of mundane trivialities directed at others in the room, and would expect me to be alert enough to pick it out.
This is extremely important. Okay, now, any person who is self-realized is not so easy to understand. It's not so easy to fathom what they are talking about and what they are saying. Okay, now to learn the lessons, you have to be very, very attentive. What is he saying? Is he talking to you? Is he talking to someone else? So in a group, when a guru is talking to a group of people, but may actually be giving a message to a specific person. This is there with all these people who are self-realized. They also want to see how much attention you are paying, whether you are really taking care to understand what they are talking about. This becomes extremely important. Okay, this is very, very important over here.
Weeks or months later, he would question me about it, suddenly and without warning. I would be expected not only to have noted and remembered the data, but to have processed it internally to fit my own situation as best I could.
So again, so when the lesson was given, you were expected to understand it, adhere to it, work on it, and be prepared to answer for it.
He often observed, what sort of educational system do we have nowadays? They announce the examinations in advance so that any idiot can mug up a bunch of notes in preparation. The key to testing someone is to test them when they least expect it and are least prepared for it. Then you have an accurate idea of how much they really know.
Now, this is again very, very important. It is said that you will forget 90% or 95% of what you've read in a book within the next 3 months or a year. Okay, you look at yourself. Okay, now if you pick up a book and you'll find that you remember snippets of the book, you will not remember the full book or what the data was there in the book. So now the ability to actually inculcate, to be able to take into yourself, is the most important thing. Today, again, as he very correctly said, people mug up things, but they inculcated it. If you change something in the question, the guy who's mugging will not be able to answer the question. So, a understanding of the process, the understanding of the topic is more important than to mug up word to word what is happening. Okay, which is what we are doing today. People are just mugging up. The guy who can mug up more does very well in the exams. The guy who actually brings stuff into their life do not take cognizance because they are more experiential. They are acting out of experience rather than just mugging up. A mugger will have the information, but he will not have the experience. A person who knows will again have the information and the experience. That will become wisdom. So he will
Some,
have it anytime. Anytime the guy asks you, he'll be able to respond to you.
Sometimes just keeping up with Vimlanand's talks was test enough. Depending on his mood and audience, he might speak in very fluent High British English, in colloquial Gujarati, or most commonly in Hindi. When the mood struck him, he could switch to high flown Urdu and sometimes stabbed at Marathi or Bengali. He was an actor by inclination, and he had an incredible command over a wide variety of language styles, which he could permute at will to obtain precisely the right effect on his audience.
So now this is also important. How to communicate, having various methods of communication so that whatever he is wanting to say gets understood by the audience. Okay. So they can play. There's a play in words. Whenever we are going into these expanded states, there's always a play in words. There's a play on the tone. There's a play on the nuance. And the apt student is going to actually catch it, right? So that you have to dumb it down to the level of your crowd, but you also have to, it's a thin line between what you want to make them understand and what they understand. That, that's like a dumru. You have to have that rhythm to be able to do it.
Over the 8 years and 9 months that I was privileged to know him, he repeated each of his favorite stories a dozen times or more, but never the same way each time. Each repetition was uniquely flavored by his delivery.
So now again, any good teacher will always repeat stuff, because how do we understand? If we just listen to something once, it generally doesn't go into the head. But when we hear it over and over and over again with different perspectives, we are getting the same message. That is when it actually sinks into us. So you'll find that any good teacher will constantly be repeating stuff.
So, Nikedya, don't worry when you are repeating stories to us.
I just qualify my statement.
Translation was thus no easy task. I have rendered all his words into English, approximating in his usual English style the intent which flowed through whatever vocabulary, syntax, and diction he was employing in whatever language he was speaking at the time.
So now this is
Working
another task that people who are actually becoming scribes or noting what is being said by the guru, right? Because it will always be colored a little bit by your understanding. But that's part of the game. I mean, today the the scripts, etc., that we have are there because these people transcribed it. So otherwise we won't even have had it, right? So again, gratitude is there, but yeah, the original thing, always there's a twist to it. That's a given.
Working from memory and from the brief notes I would jot down after our conversations, I decided it would be most effective to leave the narrative in his own words throughout, so that readers can imagine, if they like, that they, too, sat with Vimlanand and heard him tell his tales. There is another reason for presenting his words as they have been spoken. Vimlanand's impression on people was achieved primarily not by what he did, but how he did it, not by what he said, though this was important, but by how he said it. Who he was more significant who he was more significant than what he did, but he made people dig for his interior reality, and most often they would come up empty handed.
So again, it is difficult to understand these people, because in one situation they'll act in a particular way, in another situation they'll act in a totally different way. So again, the play of time, place, and person. Okay, they're not fixed, they're not rigid, they're not going to act in the same way. So it becomes very difficult to understand these people. He'll do one thing and tell you it's not right, then he'll do the same thing and say it's right. Okay, so understanding the guru becomes very, very important. That's where the intelligence, the dedication of the student starts to show up.
Those few who knew him well, at least superficially, could never agree with each other on who he was, because his personality differed for each of his friends. He was a multitude of different people all in one body.
So again,
Once,
behaving in different ways with different people in different situations at different times. So total flexibility. And this is one of the ways in which the Aghori actually acts. Okay, or acts what is that, because they can mold themselves to whatever is required of that particular situation.
once before he had met me, he had a desire to jot down his musings and to accompany them with testimonies from his close acquaintances. He asked several of his friends, "If you had to write down something about me, what would you write?" One replied with a single word, "versatile." Another said, words just cannot express the reality. A third opined, I would just turn in a blank sheet of paper because by saying nothing, everything is said. His foster daughter had the last word by informing him, no one has any business to read about you because unless they have experienced you, they could never know the reality.
Beautiful, right? This one was really beautiful. I would just turn in a blank sheet of paper because by saying nothing, everything is said. So again, everything is in nothing and nothing is in everything. Beautiful.
She was motivated by possessiveness, no doubt, and in fact knew him no better than did any of the rest of us. But her point is well taken. How does one convey in two dimensional print a multi-dimensional being? And it was not that he had anything to hide. There was nothing inscrutable about him. He never put on airs. He was available for everyone's scrutiny. He would talk to us in the way a child talks to his mother, neglecting to alter or hold back anything for the sake of self image. He was a true innocent at heart, a child in many ways, never ashamed to display his innocent wonderment or admit to his mistakes. And like a child, he could equally well be a bad loser at games. The Agori in him expected to win.
So again, what is happening over here? There is no facade. He is who he is. Okay. The childlike quality, when a person becomes highly spiritual, automatically the childlike quality comes in. If you see a child, the child is always in wonderment, always looking at things around him, is always fascinated by everything. Today we have lost that. And that is why, again, I'm repeating this again. We ask this question. You can ask yourself this question. When was the last time you did something new? When did you push yourself? When did you push your bar last? It is very, very important. To grow, we need to keep pushing our bar. What happens is we get stuck in that normal routine, in that pattern. We keep getting stuck in that pattern, which is one of the things that we talk about in the workshops also, is that find your pattern and then transcend it. Okay, so this kind of a person will never get stuck into a pattern.
Perhaps it was because of this child within him that he could be such a good mother to all those around him. Or perhaps his concentration on the Divine Mother engendered the child in him. Whatever the causation, he was like a truly incorrigible child, a prankster from birth, always out for a gentle practical joke, ready to laugh at anything funny and to make anyone else laugh if he could. Nothing was bland around him. He could be miserable, overjoyed, or profoundly taciturn. He was never merely sad, happy, or quiet. His Agora training had taught him to succeed or die. He never played any role half heartedly but threw himself fully into everything he did, no matter how minor. There was not a phony bone in his body.
So again, no facade. Okay. Whatever he did with full commitment, with full focus, and he put his all into it. No half-heartedness, right? No excuses, no complaints. Just go for the goal. So again, in the Gita also, Nagaji keeps saying, find a bigger laksh, find a goal, and then work on that goal. So as soon as we find a proper goal for ourselves, automatically we will start working towards it. But then again, you have to keep working at it. You'll fail. It's like that story about that. I think it was a crab or whatever was climbing the wall and constantly slipping, climbing the wall and constantly slipping. But again, with effort, he actually climbed and went over. Was it the crab or something else? Can anyone answer?
I think the frog.
Spider.
The
No,
frog, yeah.
it was a spider.
The spider,
Spider.
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 Yeah,
Spider.
whatever.
He
It's like,
climbed the water spout, not the wall.
okay. Chalo, theek
Quincy
hai.
spider.
The personality Vimlanand was indeed amazingly versatile. His family once owned most of Bombay, and his early life was princely, but the life of idle riches never tempted him. He knew by turns fabulous wealth and wretched poverty, and served variously as an army officer, textile machinery manufacturer, dairy owner, quarry operator, racecourse gambler, and anchorite. He achieved high academic qualifications and observed strict spiritual disciplines. Experts at Indian music regarded him both as an instrumental and vocal maestro. Among those who knew him, he was renowned for his expertise at astrology, his ability to diagnose disease by merely looking at a patient's face, and his capacity to interpret the body markings on horses and elephants.
So now this becomes very important. Okay. He was an expert in astrology and he had an ability to diagnose a disease merely by looking at a patient's face. This is what something that John Cottam is doing. Okay. So everything is everything in the microcosm is in the macrocosm. So you can look at a palm of a person and tell about a person. You can look at the face and tell about the face. There's another theory by which you can look at the head bumps and talk about the person. There's another theory you can look at the feet and tell about the person. In fact, I have this one book that they can do a diagnosis of a person by looking at the sole of the shoe of a person of the person that the person wears on a regular basis. So everything talks about us. Like every cell has the DNA and every DNA tells the whole story. So we are living in a holographic universe. Everything is present in everything. If I behave in a particular way in one situation, it is the same way that I will behave in another situation. And most of us have this radar. Okay, we are not consciously aware, but we get a snapshot. There's this book called The Blink. I was just reading it in this in the program that we are going to do with the spoon bending and all that. Hopefully in January I'll bring it out. So he says that everyone gets a snapshot. Today you're meeting a person, you get a gist, you get a gestalt about that person, but you're not aware of it. The more you can tune yourself, you'll get the gestalt. And an Aghori has the full gestalt. He is in tune with the universe. He's always watching for what the universe is telling him. So any kind of marking, etc., they can actually figure it out. So they can interpret which horse is good, not good, who's sick, who's not sick, what is the guy thinking literally. You can work out with what the bodily process, etc. is.
In his youth, he was a semi pro wrestler and won his last bout at age 38, defeating a boy half his age. I never saw him beating at wrestling, even when his opponent was a powerful young wrestler one third his age. His friends regularly demanded that he cook for them. So tasty and unique were his culinary concoctions. He could move each and every muscle in his body, including his ears and eyebrows, in time to music as a result of his training in Indian dance. He was an artist, he liked to say. Here in India, we believe in watching the artist at work, not in looking at the work of the artist. Artistry is not what the artist produces, but is the artist himself producing. A great composer's music may be transmitted from generation to generation in the West. Our great musicians do not concentrate on creating compositions, they create new musicians to maintain the progression of the artistry.
So this is very beautifully put. I mean, I know that many people over here are very interested in Indian classical music. You'll find that in Indian classical music, there's no composition. There is a base, there is an adhar, and all the, the nuances just work on the adhar. So no music, Indian classical musical concert will be the same. Whereas if you in the Western countries, if a piano recital is there, it will be exactly the same. So you won't find any Indian musician looking at keys, etc., to play. Okay, they will all be performing literally ex tempo. Are you all understanding what I'm saying? They will be performing ex tempo. They don't have any musical scores, etc., which they read. So they just go with the flow. They go with the energy of the environment. They go with their mood, how they are doing. So again, in India, the musician is made, not a musical composition. Of course, you have the rags, which I understand, but then again, the upar wala jo cheez hai, that is totally made ex tempo.
How can one then transmit Vimlanand's artistry to anyone who has not seen it at work? The use of his words is transmission of his art, but only alert readers will be able to detect the subtlety of his artistry at work there beneath. Vimlanand could learn from anyone and would make whatever he learned more artistic. He put the stamp of his personality on everything he said, did, and created, and it is my hope that this stamp appears on these pages as well. He was charming and profound, and sometimes it may seem that he was in awe of himself. In a way, he was. He was not conceited. He was in awe of what was within him. Chapter 8 on Avishkara explains this more fully.
So now what was happening? He was in awe of his own capacities to do. He was in awe of the divinity within himself, which was making him do so many things. Okay. So he was always in Ashcharya, in the sense he was always amazed. It's like the child, okay, is always amazed with everything. So now there is no boredom because you're always looking for something else. You're always working on something else. So that's
That
why you
means
become more and more versatile.
that means he was different from us, not normal.
What? Come on. Now, what you what? I think we are abnormal, auntie. All of us should be like that. Always
No, that's
looking
what
for
I'm
something
saying.
new to
It's
do.
like he was something extraordinary.
No, 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 no. I think he was. Or this is the thing that we need to become. So we need to be like him. Always versatile. Always doing new things. Always open to new experiences.
But
Okay. We
but
restrict ourselves totally. We put ourselves in boxes. We say I can't. I won't. Everything is possible for all of us. The point is that we don't put ourselves to it. We don't push ourselves. We don't raise our own bar. This kind of a person would not say no to any challenge, if you get what I mean. Are you are you are you getting what I'm
yeah,
meaning, auntie?
yeah, but he was so good at so many things. That was the thing.
Because he worked on them, right? Today, if you work on something, you'll get good at it. Who's stopping you? Who's stopping you? You tell me.
Yeah,
Bhaiya,
I'm
we people
one thing
already,
topic.
we actually start saying no before we even start.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
This kind of a person, would you expect him to say no to anything? Do you expect him to say, I can't? How many times do we say, I can't do this?
Yeah, all the time.
I am not doing this. It is not in my capacity. No, I won't do it. Attempt to do it now. Let's see what happens.
Is it because you're scared of the failure, Bhaiya? Is that
Absolutely. We've been drilled by our society that
that
this
we
is
must
good,
be
this is bad, this is you're a failure and you're not good. He is better than you. We are constantly told, we are fed all this nonsense. Okay, so we have to get out of that nonsense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He could be egotistical, and some of that ego is reflected in these pages. He maintained that death of the ego meant certain death of the organism, and so never tried to expunge his ego, preferring to keep it tightly under his control.
Now, this is extremely important. We cannot exist without ego, but we have to have a tab on our ego. This is very important statement. When even in the Gita, he's constantly saying detachment, 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 but it doesn't mean you let go of the ego totally. To live in this body, we need to have a little bit of ego. Okay. Otherwise, we will go into oneness. If the ego totally dissolves, then everything is one. So we will not be able to really function properly in this 3D environment. But we are here, right? We are here for a reason. So we need to actually fulfill that reason as to why we are here also. That's why the ego is important. But he says very clearly, he never tried to expunge his ego, but kept it tightly under his own conscious control.
He equated the ego, the individual's power of self identification, with the much misunderstood Kundalini Shakti. His control of his Kundalini enabled him to disengage his consciousness from his own limited, if versatile, personality so that he could self identify with unlimited divine personalities. Often, when he spoke, it was with the awesome confidence of divinity speaking through him, and this sometimes seemed arrogant to those humans who heard but could not or would not comprehend it.
So again, shifting states of consciousness, going into a very much more expanded state of consciousness, and then operating from there, but doing it at will. Okay, so he could shift states. This is what he's meaning over here.
He could be maddening to deal with when he thought he was right but happened to be mistaken. There were times I found it difficult to respect Vimlananda, and other times when it was difficult to like him very much. But it was never difficult to love him. When first we met, I analyzed him, dissected his opinions, and attempted to preserve the objective aloofness I felt was appropriate for a Western scientist. All in vain, for the current of warmth which flowed continuously over whoever he took into his circle of children was irresistible.
Now, this is important, right? So, this is like the ninth insight, constantly giving energy, constantly giving love, but not being wavered with your opinion. You want to be totally convinced. Your ability to put your point across is very, very pronounced. Okay. We are not going to be swayed easily, but we will also attempt to understand the other's perspective. And then he said previously that he was also very willing to admit that he was wrong when he got to know that he was wrong. So it's not that he was totally rigid, but he stood by his point of view. This is what he's saying over here. But this is very important. All in vain, for the current of warmth which flowed continuously over whoever he took into his circle of children was irresistible. So that warmth was there, that openness was there, that care was there. So people felt nurtured in his presence. Although with such a person, it can become extremely frustrating. And I'm saying it from experience that these people, they go bonkers, they make you bonkers because sometimes they tell you to do certain things which is totally out of the blue. And with your conscious mind, with your logical mind, you cannot accept that that can be true. But the fact of the matter is that they are operating at a higher state of consciousness. So what they are seeing and what they are doing, you can't comprehend. So at times there has to be a willing suspension of disbelief, and that can only come from trust, from love in that particular personality.
My distrustful Western nature balked at first, but eventually my doubt dissolved in spite of itself, and he and I settled into the seemingly preordained role of father and son. Or perhaps I should say father and mother and son, for never did his love lose its motherliness. Two principles guided his teaching: compassion for all beings, including the seemingly insentient, such as rocks, and perpetual awareness of Rinubandhan, the bondage of karmic debt.
So now again, compassion for all. If you see in the shift we read, reverence for all life, nat- natural sincerity, gentleness, and supportiveness. If you see those things that were spoken in shift, what is it which will create a shift in you are exactly there in him. Okay. So he was very compassionate with everything. It's not that he was even inanimate objects, he was compassionate to. So you can see that his love was flowing even into them. Also, whenever there is an action, there is always a counter reaction. So karma is there, okay? But with what state of consciousness you are performing the action, that is what that creates the karmic debt. Now, if I've already created a karmic debt, then the balance has to be maintained. So he was very, very aware of it. He was conscious of what he was doing. So certain actions, as we read in the books and even in the next books, he was very aware of what was creating karmic debt and what was just an action. Like Krishna Bhagwan always said that do your karma. That means do the action, leave the fruit to me. So he was very consciously aware of when he was doing something which was creating karmic debt, and when something was just an action, it was not creating any karmic debt.
His compassion for his friends and led him to ruin his health and exhaust his wealth to insulate them as far as possible from their own karmic debts.
So now this is the litmus test of a guru. Any problem that a student has becomes the responsibility of a guru. Today, I don't see any guru taking responsibility for their student. If anything is going wrong with the student and the student has taken you as a guru, it becomes your business to take care of it and sort it out. Okay. And over here, he, to harm, with harm to himself, he would still take care of his friends and his students.
His shoulders were unusually wide, perhaps from his wrestling, and he used to say, "Since nature has given me such broad shoulders, I should support whomever I can. Why should any child worry about Rin Bandhan when its mother or father is there to repay its debts?"
So again, taking total care of any action, reaction of his children.
He treated all who came before him, even the buffoons, as a fond and indulgent mother would treat her beloved children. Women found him irresistible because he projected onto every female the same tremendous devotion which he directed in his worship towards the mother goddess. Until his dying day, Vimlanand's sole refuge was the motherhood of God.
So again, treating everyone, anyone who came to him, he would offer whatever he could. Okay, so there was no holding back. A person who's operating at that level of consciousness will treat everyone equally. And see, this becomes a problem also in the sense that the really close family members at times start getting put off because they care for everyone equally, right? So yeah, anyone who comes to him for refuge comes under the umbrella, he starts taking a lot of care for them. So this is another trait of a highly spiritual person.
He and I selected the name Vimlanand for use in his book from the many names he used during this lifetime. Its variety of meanings make it appropriately representative of who he was. In Sanskrit, Vimlanand equals Vimala, pure, plus Anand, joy, bliss, or literally the bliss of purity. Malam vidvam sayati iti Vimalaha. The absolute annihilation of filth is Vimala. Filth is here the filth of attribution, the limitations imposed upon pure existence as a result of its incarnation. When the cosmic play of creation, preservation, and destruction is transcended, all limitation is transcended, and that state is Vimala.
So again, purity. So we have to constantly work on ourselves. We have to constantly purify ourselves, constantly purify ourselves. If you see gold also, it will be 99.99% pure. It is never 100% pure. So purity, the more pure we can become, the less baggage that we are carrying. That is what we are working on over here, right? So what is that? Idea is to keep working on purifying ourselves. And he was working on that.
Or when an aspirant has gone beyond the ego's flaws, when the ego is completely naked, cleansed of its accretions of personality and its stains of desire, then it perceives pure consciousness and knows that pure consciousness to be both thyself and myself. And that is Vimala.
So again, ego is still there, but the ego realizes that I am there and here at the same time. Okay, so beautifully put this one. So dropping of desires, dropping of personality, no facade, totally, totally open. That is that state of purity and expanded consciousness.
Or the Anand an Aghori receives from his rituals cannot be purer, Vimala, because he sees the face of his beloved deity in everything and everyone.
So again, once you evolve that to that state of consciousness, you see the divine in everything around you, in every person around you. So, and there is no you are me and I am you. So how can I harm you? Because if I'm harming you, I am harming myself. That is that state of consciousness, that equanimity, that equilibrium that is reached, that subtle purity which is reached when we reach that state of consciousness.
Vimlanand can be derived in many different ways in Sanskrit, but its special significance here is that Vimlananda's physical mother was named Vimala, Vimala plus Nanda, son of Vimala. Vimlanand told me, when I was a wandering ascetic, I thought it would be wonderful to appear at my home one day and have the servant announce to my mother, Vimlanand has come. What joy it would have given her. So, Vimlanand, it was for this book in lieu of such other names as Aghoranath, Master of Aghora, Shah e Moj, King of Bliss, or even Bandal e Aftab, son among exaggerators. This last is significant in that Vimlanand was well larger than life, and some of his stories may seem expanded beyond the bounds of plausibility. We Westerners ordinarily equate truth with the objective reality of sense perception.
Okay, so
Vim-
this becomes important, right? Most of the time, because we've all become very logical minded. Again, we talk about, we've spoken about this before, that when we were hunter gatherers, the right side of the brain was working more. Then came the Renaissance period where art, culture, and all that grew a lot, where we became whole brain. And then the Industrial Revolution came up, where we became left brain. Now, today, most of us have been born in that kind of a society where the logic is given more predominance. Okay. So over here he says, and when the logic is given more predominance, we objectify everything. We are working with objectivity. So all our minds are logical and we are looking at objectifying everything. The subjectivity of things, the holistic nature of things, that has taken a sideline.
Vimlanand was concerned only that the subjective reality of the stories he told exerts specific effects on the subjective realities of his listeners. For he held that objective reality is continuously being altered by our perceptions of it.
Now, this is extremely important. The subjective reality, what is. But our perception can change according to our abilities to perceive. Okay. So now, what someone is perceiving, depending on the power of the eyesight, like today, someone who's reading this script on the board, for someone, it may be very hazy that they cannot read it. For someone else, it may be absolutely clear. Now, which is right? Are you understanding what I'm saying? So our perception colors the way that we are looking at stuff. So the sense perceptions are limited by the capacity of the sense perception.
Thus, it is immaterial if, for example, someone really does cut off his limbs and throw them into a blazing fire, only to have them reattach spontaneously after several hours, or whether he merely visualizes the scenario so intensely that he thoroughly convinces himself that the events did indeed occur. The result, increased stability of mind regardless of external irritant, will create increased physical stability as well. For the mind, reality is defined by its perceptions. Agora is total control of perception.
So now this is important. In many of these tantric and agora practices, they actually dismember themselves. This is there in shamanism also. One of the most powerful exercises in shamanic practices is called dismemberment, where you actually go into an altered state of consciousness and you ask the spirits to dismember you, that is, dissolve your physical body and then to reconstitute and construct it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're actually axing off and cutting off your hand and putting it into the sacrificial fire. we've heard of these many stories, where in Ramayana also, Ravan cut his head off and sacrificed it to Shivji, right? We've heard of that story. Now, he was not actually cutting his head off. He was in his mind, he was cutting his head off. This is what he's saying over here. But in the mind, the perception of that act is so pronounced that for you it seems like it is real. We've also talked about mansik puja and the regular ritual puja. In your mind's eye, if you're actually chadhawing the flower, or you're chadhawing the curd, or you're chadhawing the water, it actually manifests because you're so engrossed in it that in your perception, that is the reality. So if in your perception it's the reality, it is the reality as far as you are concerned. But that is from the subjective perspective. From the objective or the materialistic perspective, you may not be doing it. But your subjective reality will alter your objective reality. How to explain this? Now, they've done these tests. We've spoken about this again before, where they had two groups of people and two groups. So, for 20 people, 20 people. Now, one group of people, they told them you go to the gym and work out. Okay. One group of people, they told them you sit in the couch and you imagine that you're working out and totally go through the experience of working out. Now, how many of y'all feel, you can raise your hands, that the person sitting in the couch, the muscle will grow? Raise your hands in the system. Okay, you've heard me. So most of the people feel that it won't grow,
No,
right?
Bhaiya, you've talked about it
I've
earlier. That's
spoken
why we
about it,
know.
okay?
Yeah, that's why we know. That's why we know.
But the fact of the matter is that the muscle grew, right? So how did it grow? They didn't do any exercise, but their subjective reality, or the thing that they did in their mind, created objective reality. Are you all getting what I'm saying? This is what he is talking about here. That the ritual done in the subjective way is so ingrained and so real for them that it becomes objectified.
So
Okay,
can we also explain here now, like when vaccinations and all, they're talking about it, na? Experiments
yeah.
ho rahe hain. So some people, they're not really giving the actual medicine.
Yeah,
That's
so
just a
placebo effect.
placebo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So placebo is of course there. They have found, okay, really they have found that
Yes.
there is very little difference between placebo
Huh.
and you actually taking the drug.
True, true, true.
So chemical drugs, there's very little difference.
So
In
it's
fact,
just your faith.
yeah,
It's
it's
just
just the
what you
faith.
believe.
Yeah,
Huh.
exactly. So there's this book, Spontaneous Healing. I forget the name of the author. He's given so many stories over there. There was one case where this guy had cancer, and there was talk of an experimental drug which was said to be working like magic. So somehow he got that drug, and he took the drug and he became totally fit. Everything was okay, right? And then suddenly in the news, some news report came out that that drug is said not to be working. What do you think happened to him?
Again, he became unwell.
He became unwell again.
Hmm.
Because in his subjective reality, by taking the drug, he is well, right? So in the objective world also he is well. Now in the subjective reality, now in the objective world rather, news came that it's not working. So he became unwell again. So our subjective reality, what are we perceiving with our mind, is so important that it's not funny. So what are your thoughts? What are you thinking of? What are you looking at? What is the perspective with which you're looking at? What is the state of consciousness you're operating from? Becomes so important. Can you all understand just by this particular paragraph?
When Vimlanand felt it essential to make a point to some child, he would unhesitatingly exaggerate or magnify his stories, just as we might do for real children.
Now, this is also important. You magnify something so that the person understands it. It's not that it is magnified, but understanding is there, then you bring it back into its regular shape.
Also, Vimlanand spoke mainly for Indians, who often inflate the content of events they report. Indian listeners have learned to automatically compensate for this expansion by mentally scaling down whatever is said. Thus, Vimlanand's exaggeration would be perceived approximately accurately by an Indian listener.
I think this is slowly changing, but yeah, it's still there.
I mention this because I was continuously aware of this cultural trait and have accounted for it. The stories you read here have been calibrated for maximum veracity, at least in the system of reality in which Vimlanand lived. Also, the language of this book has been slightly sanitized at his own request. He used to make regular use of vulgarity, but only when he spoke with people whose normal speech is vulgar, in order to be coherent with them. In addition, each cuss word was spoken with a hidden meaning behind it, a hoary tantric tradition called Sandhya Bhasha. But that is another story.
So again, an Agori will not be embarrassed by anything. Okay, that is very, very clear. So the way that is required for him to be able to behave in a particular situation, he will, I mean, he will be confidently and fearlessly operating in that scenario.
No idle tale ever escaped his lips. Each was aimed at a specific listener and might change its form according to the lesson he felt the listener needed to learn.
So this is
Though,
important, right? So he, even when he is speaking to 20 people, he's focusing on one person. And he will speak the tone of the person, what that person requires. Now, the ability of the person to perceive it and to actually inculcate it is not naturally dependent on that person. But having said that, I'm sure he must have toned it in a way that that person would actually understand.
though all his stories were based on incidents which actually happened to him, at least subjectively.
Now, this is important, right? Stories that actually happened to him, at least subjectively. So now he may have actually experienced that experience in an expanded state of consciousness or in his mind's eye, but not in the objective world. So for him, it was the truth. This is even said for power versus force, where he said that I have tested everything millions of times or whatever. Now, it may have been physically impossible for him to test the consciousness level. I'm talking about David Hawkins. Everything that the way that he said that he tested it, but he may have been testing in his subjective mind. Okay, this is also the way in which theoretical physicists work. They are The experiment is done in their mind's eye. So in their subjective reality, they are actually doing the experiment and coming down with the formula. But in the objective world, it takes time for it to come down into objective reality. So Einstein's many of his theories were proved many decades after he actually passed away.
As noted above, however, he transcended the blaze factuality of objective reality and ascended to the mythic. His tales were carefully textured with deep meanings available to the clever pupil who could properly interpret the words and the intonation and emotion with which they were spoken, ignoring the minor detail which Vimlanand himself scorned.
So again, bhav ko samjho. Okay, don't go into the surface, but understand the layer, understand the depth of communication that was taking place. Now, that is something that is learned. As you work with a person, ultimately you start developing that language. So over here also, whenever we are in the excursion and the other Monroe programs, we are telling you very clearly that when you go into these altered states, you have to develop a language of your own. You have to understand the subtleties with which that communication takes place. So this is exactly what he's taking over here, that the clever student would understand the deeper meaning of what he was conveying.
His tales were carefully textured with deep meanings available to the clever pupil who could properly interpret the words and the intonation and emotion with which they were spoken, ignoring the minor detail which Vimlanand himself scorned. Vimlanand would unveil a story and present it to an assembly of people in his living room when the conversation seemed completely innocuous, and someone in that company would hear it and realize that it referred to a situation about which he had intended to ask Vimlanand, but had thus far been unable to do so.
Now, this happens regularly with spiritual people. You go there, you are unable to ask your question, but you come back with your answer because there's some kind of a resonance which takes place. Some kind of an understanding which happens. And I've seen
Vimlanand,
this over and over again.
Vimalanand but had thus far been unable to do so. Sorry. There was a thrill in sitting quietly and suddenly realizing that a story was being directed at you. Vimlanand could not often target anyone by name, but a word here or a clue there would give his intention away. Vimlanand loved to play consciously with his children, just as a mother plays abstractedly with hers, all the while maintaining awareness of the pot on the stove.
So again, being here and there at the same time. Okay. Being in dual consciousness.
Vimlanand likewise manifested otherness continually, an eternal sense of other spheres of activity and other levels of awareness, which operated in him simultaneously.
So now, again, operating at different levels of consciousness at the same time. So we say that you can operate at different focus levels at the same time. Where you pay your attention in that state of consciousness, you will be.
He acknowledged this and often said, to be really aware, you must be able to know simultaneously what is going on thousands of miles away today, what may have happened here centuries ago, what will happen anywhere in the world decades from now, and what is occurring, has occurred, or will occur on other planes of existence. And you must still act as if you know nothing.
So now, when we are in all these states of awareness, right? Now, if I'm in focus 15, everything is happening there, state of no time, right? So if I'm totally immersed in focus 15, then I know exactly what is happening now, what happened in the past, is going to happen in the future, what is happening at the end of the universe, what is happening here. So again, this comes back to the trait of a guru. The guru needs maybe thousands of miles away from you, but the guru has conscious awareness as to what is going on with his student. That is the hallmark of a guru. The guru takes total responsibility for his student. This is what he's saying here. And also, the guru has to have the intelligence to what level of awareness he needs to bring to his students, because all of us cannot handle the truth. So how much truth can you handle? What is the guidance needed to be given? What is the lesson that the student needs to learn? Has to be totally always observed by the guru before giving that particular lesson. So holding the students in the palm of his hand and yet allowing them to experience the experience is what the game is all about.
And you must still act as if you know nothing. You must just sit and talk with other people and play the part which nature has assigned to you. In his music, his conversation, his chess, and even his sleep, he was always aware both of what was going on around him and also effortlessly of some other reality.
So this is something that we observed in, or when we were reading autobiography of a yogi also. Yogananji used to know in advance that the students are going to come. So he already had the meal prepared. How did he know? Right? Because all these people, these highly spiritually evolved people, they are aware. They are aware of more than what we are normally aware in this 3D reality. So they are operating in an altered state of consciousness all the time. It's not that you are going to that altered state. You are there in those states all the time. That is your state of being. That is the game that they play. यहाँ पे रोके क्या? You already
Nay, just let's little bit more.
अरे but it won't finish the paragraphs, Shivanga.
Okay, then finish. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's stop the recording.